A boy helped an old man fix his broken piano, expecting nothing in return. The next day, when the old man showed up with a wealthy man and knocked on his door, his life changed forever. Marcus Johnson was a 15-year-old boy living in Southside Chicago, where his natural talent for music and fixing things set him apart from other teenagers his age. Between singing in the church choir and teaching himself electronics repair through YouTube videos, he'd become remarkably self-sufficient for someone so young. His mother, Lisa, worked two exhausting jobs, cleaning at Memorial Hospital during the day and waiting tables at Lorenzo's restaurant in the evenings, yet somehow still managed to greet her children with a warm smile when she finally made it home. Despite her constant fatigue, she never complained about the long hours, knowing every dollar helped keep their family afloat. 8-year-old Jasmine, Marcus's sister, brightened their home with her infectious laughter and endless curiosity about everything from math to science. Their third-floor apartment was small but tidy, with family photos covering the faded walls and Marcus's tools neatly tucked away under the couch. Together, they made the best of what they had, finding joy in simple moments like shared dinners and homework sessions, even as they dreamed of a better future. The kitchen table was bathed in warm lamplight as Marcus and Jasmine worked on her math homework. Outside, the city was getting dark, but inside their small apartment, the lingering smell of mac and cheese created a cozy atmosphere. Marcus had made it for dinner earlier, with extra cheese on top just the way his sister liked it. "Think of it like pizza slices," Marcus explained, drawing circles in Jasmine's notebook. "3/4 means you've eaten 3 pieces out of 4. If you eat 2 more quarters from another pizza, how many pieces have you eaten altogether?" He watched patiently as his 8-year-old sister pondered the problem, her pigtails swaying as she leaned over her work. Jasmine tapped her pencil against the table, thinking hard. "So, 3 pieces plus 2 pieces," she mumbled, studying the drawings. Her face lit up suddenly. "That's 5 pieces, so it's 5/4. "That's exactly right." Marcus smiled, giving her shoulder a gentle squeeze. He could see she was getting tired. They'd been at this for over an hour, but she was making good progress. The clock on the wall showed 7:45 p.m., and their mom wouldn't be home from her restaurant job for a couple more hours. "Let's do one more problem," he suggested, reaching for an orange he'd saved from dinner. "Then we can take a break, and you can have your favorite snack." Jasmine nodded eagerly, already brightening at the mention of oranges. As Marcus peeled the fruit, its fresh scent mixing with the warm dinner aromas, he felt grateful for these quiet moments with his sister, even if they came with challenging fractions. A sharp knock pierced the quiet evening, startling both Marcus and Jasmine. It wasn't the usual casual tap of their neighbors, but something more urgent, almost desperate. The sound echoed through their small apartment, mixing with the lingering aroma of mac and cheese from dinner. Marcus paused in his explanation of fractions, his pencil hovering over Jasmine's homework. Nobody usually visited them at this hour, especially not on a Saturday evening when most residents were either out or settled in for the night. "Stay here and keep working on that problem," Marcus told Jasmine, gently squeezing her shoulder. His sister nodded, her eyes curious but focused on her homework. Marcus stood up, adjusting his worn t-shirt as he walked to the door. Years of being the man of the house had taught him to be cautious. He approached quietly, wondering if it might be one of his mom's co-workers from the hospital. Through the peephole, he saw something unexpected. The familiar face of Mr. Thomas Parker from upstairs, his elderly white neighbor. The old man stood there in a well-worn but clean cardigan, his white hair slightly disheveled and his usually composed face marked with worry. Mr. Thomas was known in the building as the quiet resident from the 5th floor, a retired music teacher who rarely bothered anyone. Marcus had often heard beautiful piano music drifting down from his apartment during quiet evenings. Tonight, though, Mr. Thomas looked different. His hands were fidgeting with the buttons of his cardigan, and his breathing seemed slightly labored from climbing down the stairs. Despite their different backgrounds, Mr. Thomas had always offered a kind smile when passing Marcus in the hallway, one of the few residents who treated the Johnson family with genuine warmth. "Marcus, my boy," Mr. Thomas said, his voice trembling slightly, "I'm terribly sorry to disturb you at this hour, but I have a situation." He glanced past Marcus, spotting Jasmine at the kitchen table. I know you're good with fixing things. I've heard from Mrs. Rodriguez about how you repaired her radio last month. Marcus nodded, remembering the elderly Cuban lady from the second floor. Mr. Thomas continued, his eyes pleading, "My piano. It stopped making sound. My son James is coming tomorrow for my 70th birthday, and he's supposed to perform. He's a concert pianist, you see, and this piano, it means everything to our family." The old man's voice cracked slightly on the last words, revealing just how much this meant to him. As Marcus stepped into Mr. Parker's apartment, he was struck by the tidy, well-kept nature of the small space. Family photos adorned the walls, giving the room a warm, lived-in feel. The furnishings, though modest, were clearly chosen with care and pride. Dominating the living area was a magnificent grand piano, its polished ebony surface gleaming softly in the muted lighting. Marcus couldn't help but admire the instrument, which appeared to be an heirloom of considerable age and craftsmanship. He ran his fingers reverently along the edges, taking in the ornate carvings and the faint scent of well-oiled wood. Curious, Marcus let his gaze wander to the framed photographs hanging on the walls. Many of them featured a younger Mr. Parker, often standing alongside a distinguished-looking man who Marcus assumed was his son, the renowned pianist James Parker. There were images of James performing on stage, his fingers dancing across the keys with effortless grace. Other photos captured moments of the family together, joyful gatherings, special occasions, shared laughter. The overall atmosphere of the apartment was one of quiet dignity and deep familial pride. Marcus could sense the importance of this piano, this connection to the Parkers' history, and understood why its sudden silence had caused such distress for the elderly gentleman. As he examined the instrument more closely, Marcus felt a growing determination to do whatever he could to restore its voice and preserve this cherished link to the family's past. Marcus approached the grand piano with a mixture of trepidation and determination. While he had never worked on an instrument of this caliber before, his experiences repairing various electronics around the apartment had given him a basic understanding of mechanical principles. Carefully, he ran his fingers along the surface, examining the intricate carvings and polished wood. He knew from watching countless tutorials on YouTube that the key to repairing any complex device was to take it apart slowly and methodically, identifying the root of the problem before attempting any fixes. As Marcus gently lifted the fallboard, he was met with a maze of strings, hammers, and other delicate components. He took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm and focused. Based on Mr. Parker's description, the issue seemed to be centered around the action of the keys, the mechanism that translated the player's touch into sound. Nodding to himself, Marcus decided that his best course of action would be to thoroughly inspect each portion of the action, checking for any signs of wear, misalignment, or damage. He worked patiently, taking his time to ensure he didn't inadvertently cause further harm to the precious instrument. His fingers moved with a practiced precision, drawing on the skills he had honed through countless hours of tinkering with electronics. As he methodically tested each key, Marcus couldn't help but marvel at the intricate engineering of the piano. The way the hammers struck the strings, the subtle nuances in the action that allowed for such dynamic and expressive playing, it was a true work of art, both in form and function. He found himself growing increasingly invested in the task, driven by a desire to restore this magnificent instrument to its former glory. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of careful examination, Marcus pinpointed the source of the problem. One of the hammers had become misaligned, preventing it from striking the strings properly. Gently, he adjusted the mechanism, taking care not to throw off the delicate balance of the action. With a tentative touch, Marcus pressed down on one of the keys. To his delight, the piano let out a clear, resonant note, the sound ringing out with a purity that sent a shiver down his spine. Emboldened, he played a short scale, watching in fascination as the hammers responded flawlessly to his fingertips. Mr. Parker, who had been observing Marcus's work with a mixture of trepidation and hope, let out a shaky breath as the familiar melody of a gospel hymn filled the room. Tears welled in his eyes as the rich, warm tones of the piano evoked a lifetime of cherished memories. He turned to Marcus, his face alight with gratitude. "Young man, I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've not only fixed my piano, but you've brought back the very soul of this instrument. I can't tell you what this means to me." Marcus felt a swell of pride at the older man's words, but he simply shook his head modestly. "It was my pleasure, sir," he replied. "I'm just glad I could help." As Marcus prepared to take his leave, he couldn't help but wonder what other surprises this piano might have in store. He had a feeling that this chance encounter was just the beginning of an unexpected journey. As Marcus carefully inspected the grand piano, his eyes narrowed in concentration. He knew he had to approach this task methodically, leaving no stone unturned. Gently lifting the fallboard, he was met with a complex network of strings, hammers, and other intricate components. Drawing on the knowledge he had accumulated from countless online tutorials, Marcus began to systematically test each part of the piano's action. He pressed down on the keys, listening intently for any abnormalities in the mechanism's response. It didn't take long for him to pinpoint the source of the problem. One of the hammers had become misaligned, preventing it from striking the strings properly. Delicately, Marcus set to work, trying to make the necessary adjustments. This was no simple task, as the piano's internal workings were incredibly delicate and precisely balanced. One wrong move could potentially throw the entire system out of whack. Brow furrowed in concentration, Marcus proceeded with the utmost care, his fingers moving with a practiced grace that belied his youth. As he worked, Marcus couldn't help but marvel at the sheer complexity of the instrument. The way the various components worked in seamless harmony to produce those rich, resonant tones was nothing short of remarkable. He found himself almost reverentially handling each part, mindful of the piano's status as a cherished family heirloom. Occasionally, Marcus would encounter a particularly stubborn issue, where a component seemed resistant to his adjustments. In those moments, he would pause, taking a deep breath to steady his nerves. He knew that any hasty actions could potentially do more harm than good. Patiently, he would experiment with different approaches, carefully monitoring the results until he found the solution. Through it all, Mr. Parker watched in a mixture of trepidation and hope. The elderly man had entrusted this precious piano to a virtual stranger, and Marcus could sense the weight of that responsibility. But as the minutes ticked by, and the young man continued to work with unwavering focus, a glimmer of optimism began to take root in Mr. Parker's expression. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of delicate adjustments, Marcus pressed down on one of the keys. The piano let out a clear, resonant note, the sound filling the room with a purity that sent a shiver down the older man's spine. Emboldened, Marcus played a short scale, watching in fascination as the hammers responded flawlessly to his fingertips. Mr. Parker, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, let out a shaky breath as the familiar melody of a gospel hymn began to fill the air. Marcus, unable to contain his own sense of pride and accomplishment, glanced over at the elderly gentleman, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Young man, I don't know how to thank you," Mr. Parker said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've not only fixed my piano, but you've brought back the very soul of this instrument. I can't tell you what this means to me." Marcus felt a swell of pride at the older man's words, but he simply shook his head modestly. "It was my pleasure, sir," he replied. "I'm just glad I could help." As Marcus finished his adjustments and gave the piano one final test, his fingers tentatively pressed down on the keys. He wanted to ensure that the instrument was fully restored before handing it back to Mr. Parker. The young man's heart swelled with a sense of accomplishment as the piano produced a clear, resonant note. Emboldened, he began to play a short scale, watching in fascination as the hammers responded flawlessly to his touch. The rich, warm tones filled the room, and Marcus couldn't help but marvel at the piano's transformation. Suddenly, without even thinking, his fingers began to flow effortlessly across the keys, coaxing out a familiar melody, a beloved gospel hymn that he had grown up singing in church. The music poured forth with a soulful passion, the notes reverberating with a depth of emotion that seemed to transcend the physical instrument. As the music filled the air, Marcus felt a wave of nostalgia wash over him. This was the sound of his childhood, the soundtrack to so many cherished memories. The rhythm, the harmony, the sheer power of the music. It was as if the piano had been awakened from a deep slumber, rediscovering its true voice. Mr. Parker, who had been quietly observing Marcus's work, now stared at the young man with a mixture of wonder and awe. The familiar melody evoked a lifetime's worth of memories, and tears began to well in the elderly gentleman's eyes. The rich, warm tones of the piano had brought back the very essence of the instrument, and with it, the spirit of the Parkers' family history. Marcus, lost in the music, was oblivious to the older man's reaction. His fingers danced across the keys with a natural fluency that belied his youth, and the sounds seemed to fill the room with a palpable energy. It was as if the piano had been waiting all this time for someone to unlock its true potential. And in that moment, Marcus had done just that. As the final notes faded away, a profound silence settled over the apartment. Mr. Parker stood there, his expression a mix of gratitude and disbelief. He had entrusted his cherished piano to a virtual stranger, and that stranger had not only restored the instrument to its former glory, but had also unlocked a piece of its soul that had long been dormant. The next morning, Marcus was busy preparing for the upcoming school week. As Jasmine sat watching television, his mother Lisa moved around the small kitchen, humming softly as she cooked breakfast. Suddenly, a knock at the door interrupted the peaceful routine. Marcus glanced over, his brow furrowing slightly. They didn't often have unexpected visitors, especially not this early. Wiping his hands on a dish towel, he went to answer the door. Upon opening it, Marcus was surprised to find Mr. Thomas standing there, a well-dressed middle-aged man beside him. "Good morning, Marcus," Mr. Thomas greeted, a warm smile on his face. "I hope we're not disturbing you." "No, not at all, sir," Marcus replied politely, his gaze shifting to the stranger. "How can I help you?" "This is my son, James Parker," Mr. Thomas explained, gesturing to the other man. "He'd like to speak with you, if you have a moment." James stepped forward, his eyes sparkling with a curious excitement. "It's nice to meet you, Marcus," he said, his voice friendly and engaging. "I've heard a lot about you from my father." Marcus shook the offered hand, his own expression a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Nice to meet you too, sir." He glanced back at Jasmine, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes and, "Please come in." As the two men entered the modest apartment, Marcus couldn't help but feel a twinge of self-consciousness. Their home was small and simple, a far cry from the luxurious surroundings he imagined James must be used to. But the older man didn't seem to notice or mind, his attention focused solely on Marcus. "I'm the principal of a music academy in the city," James explained, his enthusiasm palpable. "And your father told me about your remarkable talent for the piano." He paused, a proud smile spreading across his face. "I was hoping we could talk a bit more about that." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. Talent? Piano? He glanced uncertainly at his mother, who had emerged from the bedroom, drawn by the commotion. "Marcus, what's going on?" Lisa asked, her brow furrowed with concern. James turned to her, his expression warm. "Mrs. Johnson, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm James Parker, and I'd like to discuss the possibility of your son attending my music academy on a full scholarship." Lisa's eyes widened, and Marcus could practically see the wheels turning in her mind. A scholarship? For her son? It seemed almost too good to be true. As James began to explain the details of the program, Marcus found himself getting swept up in the man's infectious excitement. A full scholarship. Less that abilities, tuition, transportation, and even a stipend to help support the family. It was an opportunity he'd never even dared to dream of. Glancing at Jasmine, who was watching with rapt attention, Marcus felt a sense of hope blossoming in his chest. This could be the chance to change everything. Not just for him, but for his whole family. All he had to do was reach out and take it. The future suddenly seemed so much brighter, and Marcus couldn't wait to see what possibilities lay ahead. After the initial introductions, James Parker, the well-dressed man accompanying Mr. Thomas, stepped forward with an air of enthusiasm. "Mrs. Johnson, it's a pleasure to meet you," he said, his voice warm and engaging. "I'm the principal of a prestigious music academy here in the city, and I have to say your son Marcus has quite a remarkable talent that I'm very interested in." Marcus felt a surge of both excitement and apprehension as James continued. "Your father has told me all about your natural abilities with the piano, Marcus," he said, his gaze shifting to the young man. "But beyond just your musical talent, I've been impressed by the stories of your character, your kindness, your determination, your willingness to help others." James paused, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "You see, at my academy, we don't just focus on developing technical skills. We believe in nurturing the whole person, their creativity, their confidence, their ability to make a positive impact on the world." He turned back to Lisa, a hopeful smile playing on his lips. "That's why I'd love the opportunity to speak with you further about the possibility of Marcus attending our program on a full scholarship." Lisa's eyes widened, and Marcus could practically see the gears turning in her mind. A full scholarship for her son? It sounded almost too good to be true. She glanced at Marcus, who met her gaze with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "A full scholarship," Lisa murmured, her voice tinged with disbelief. That would change everything for our family." James nodded emphatically. "Absolutely. The scholarship would cover not only Marcus's tuition, but also provide a stipend to help with transportation and other living expenses." He paused, his expression turning earnest. "I know your family's circumstances aren't easy, Mrs. Johnson, but I truly believe that Marcus has the potential to thrive in our program, and I want to do whatever I can to make that opportunity accessible to him." Marcus felt a surge of hope welling up inside him. This could be the chance he'd been waiting for, the chance to pursue his passion for music, to develop his talents, and to maybe, just maybe, change the trajectory of his family's future. He glanced at Jasmine, who was watching the exchange with wide, captivated eyes, and knew that this was about more than just him. "Mrs. Johnson," James said, his voice gentle but firm, "I'd like to formally invite Marcus to attend my academy. I truly believe he has what it takes to succeed, and I want to give him that chance." The weight of the decision hung in the air, and Marcus held his breath, waiting to see what his mother would say. This was a moment that could alter the course of their lives forever, and he knew they had to seize it. After the initial shock of James Parker's scholarship offer wore off, Lisa Johnson's expression shifted to one of cautious contemplation. She knew an opportunity like this could truly change the trajectory of her family's future, but the practical concerns weighed heavily on her mind. "A full scholarship, you say?" she asked, her tone laced with a mixture of hope and hesitation. "That would certainly ease the financial burden, but..." Lisa glanced around their modest apartment, her gaze settling on Jasmine, who watched the exchange with washed, attentive eyes. "There's more to consider than just the money." James nodded empathetically, sensing the woman's apprehension. "I understand your hesitation, Mrs. Johnson," he said, his voice warm and reassuring. "This is a big decision, and I want you to know that we don't take it lightly at the academy." He paused, reaching into the briefcase he had brought with him. "Let me tell you a bit more about what we have to offer." James extracted several brochures and documents, handing them to Lisa. "Our program is designed to nurture the whole student, not just their musical abilities." As Lisa leafed through the materials, James continued, "In addition to intensive piano instruction, we have courses in music theory, composition, and even performance. But we also place a strong emphasis on personal development, things like time management, public speaking, and community engagement." Marcus watched his mother's expression shift as she read through the information, her brow furrowing in concentration. "This all sounds quite impressive," she admitted, her voice tinged with wonder. "But the time commitment, the transportation, how would that work with my schedule?" "Ah, yes, an excellent question," James replied, nodding thoughtfully. "We understand that your family has unique needs, so we've structured the program to be as flexible and accommodating as possible." He paused, offering Lisa an understanding smile. "For example, we can work with you to arrange transportation to and from the academy, and the class schedule is designed to allow students to maintain other responsibilities, like caring for family members." Lisa's gaze flickered to Marcus, who looked back at her with a mixture of hope and trepidation. She knew how much this opportunity meant to him, but the practical concerns were daunting. "And the costs?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "Aside from the tuition, are there any other expenses we'd need to cover?" "Not at all," James assured her. "The scholarship would cover the full cost of tuition, as well as a monthly stipend to help with things like meals and transportation. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. Mrs. Johnson, I want you to know that we are committed to making this work for your family. This isn't just about nurturing Marcus's musical talents. It's about opening doors, creating opportunities, and empowering all of you to reach your full potential. Lisa fell silent, her gaze drifting between the documents in her hands and the hopeful faces of her children. Marcus could practically see the wheels turning in her mind as she weighed the pros and cons. This was a life-changing decision, and he knew she needed time to carefully consider it. After a long moment, Lisa looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. If this is truly what you're offering, then I don't see how we can say no, she said, her voice thick with emotion. This could be the chance of a lifetime for our family. Marcus felt a surge of elation, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and disbelief. This was really happening. His dream was within reach. Glancing at Jasmine, he saw the same sense of hope and wonder reflected in her eyes. And he knew that their lives were about to change in ways they'd never imagined. As Lisa pored over the documents James had provided, her brow furrowed with contemplation. This was a remarkable opportunity, but she couldn't ignore the practical realities of their family's situation. Sensing her hesitation, James leaned forward, his expression understanding. I know this is a big decision, Mrs. Johnson, and I want you to know that we're prepared to do whatever it takes to make this work for your family. He paused, his gaze shifting between Lisa and the two children. I understand the challenges you face, the financial strain, the demands on your time, the need to care for your family. That's why we've designed our program to be as accommodating and supportive as possible. James reached into his briefcase and extracted a few more documents. In addition to the full scholarship for tuition, we're prepared to offer a monthly stipend to help with transportation and living expenses. He smiled warmly. We know that freeing up those resources could make a world of difference for you and your children. Lisa's eyes widened as she scanned the details, her fingers tracing the figures on the page. This is incredible, she breathed, a glimmer of hope shining in her eyes. But that's not all, James continued. We also recognize the importance of keeping Marcus's family commitments in mind. That's why we'll work with you to create a flexible schedule that allows him to continue caring for his sister when needed. He paused, his gaze earnest. And if there's anything else we can do to support your family, whether it's help finding stable employment, accessing social services, or simply providing a listening ear, please don't hesitate to let us know. We're here to ensure that Marcus has every opportunity to thrive, both academically and personally. Lisa felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. This man, this complete stranger, was offering her family a lifeline, a chance to not just survive, but to truly flourish. Tears threatened to spill down her cheeks as she looked at Marcus, saw the hope and excitement shining in his eyes. This is more than I ever could have imagined, she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. I can't even begin to thank you. James smiled warmly, reaching out to gently squeeze her hand. You don't have to, Mrs. Johnson. Seeing Marcus and your family succeed is all the thanks we need. He paused, his expression turning thoughtful. So what do you say? Are you ready to take this leap with us? Lisa glanced at her children once more, her heart swelling with love and determination. This was the chance they'd been waiting for, a chance to change the trajectory of their lives. Squaring her shoulders, she nodded decisively. Yes, she said, her voice steady. Let's do this. Marcus stood at the gates of the Chicago Music Academy, his heart thudding in his chest. The sleek building towered above him, a stark contrast to the worn brick apartments of South Side where he grew up. In one hand, he clutched a weathered notebook filled with musical scribbles, while the other fidgeted nervously with the strap of his backpack. This was a new world, and as intimidating as it felt, he couldn't shake the bubbling excitement within him. Inside the academy, the halls hummed with energy. The air was alive with the sounds of piano scales, violins tuning, and lively chatter between students. Marcus took a deep breath, reminding himself why he was here. This wasn't just about him. It was about creating a better future for his family for Jasmine, and for the mother who had worked tirelessly to give him this chance. It didn't take long for Marcus to find his tribe. During his first class, he met Liam, a passionate violinist who spoke with rapid-fire enthusiasm about his dream of playing in an orchestra. Then there was Sophia, a pianist who had a natural flair for jazz and was always experimenting with bold, unexpected chords. Lastly, he clicked with Anna, a shy yet brilliant composer whose notebooks overflowed with intricate melodies. Their shared love for music drew them together like magnets, and before he knew it, Marcus found himself part of a tight-knit group. They practiced together, swapped ideas, and challenged one another to push their limits. Under the guidance of his teachers, Marcus began to blossom. His piano instructor, Mr. Albright, was a patient yet demanding mentor. He had a knack for drawing out Marcus's natural talent while teaching him to refine his technique. Music isn't just about playing the notes, Mr. Albright would often say. It's about telling a story. Inspired, Marcus began blending the soulful gospel melodies from his childhood with the classical techniques he was learning, crafting a style uniquely his own. Despite the long days at the academy, Marcus never let go of his responsibilities at home. Each evening, after hours of classes and practice, he returned to their small apartment to help Jasmine with her homework. Her bright smile was his anchor, a reminder of why he couldn't afford to give up. On weekends, he made sure the family spent time together, whether it was playing board games or singing along to old gospel tunes. Meanwhile, Lisa's life was beginning to change as well. When James Parker offered her a position at the Academy's administrative office, she hesitated at first. It felt too good to be true, but with gentle encouragement from Marcus, she accepted. The new job came with better hours, a steadier income, and a work environment that treated her with respect. For the first time in years, Lisa had evenings free to sit with her children at the dinner table, and mornings where she didn't have to rush out the door before dawn. The Johnsons' lives were shifting in ways they hadn't felt possible. The little apartment, once filled with quiet sacrifices and unspoken words, now buzzed with hope. Marcus felt it in the way his fingers danced more confidently across the piano keys. Jasmine felt it in the pride she carried when talking about her big brother to her friends. Lisa felt it in the lightness that accompanied her walks to work, knowing she could finally dream of a better tomorrow. Though challenges still lay ahead, this new beginning felt like a gift, a chance for each of them to rise above their struggles and embrace the promise of something greater. Marcus was no longer just a boy from Southside trying to make ends meet. He was a musician, a dreamer, and a beacon of hope for his family. And this was only the start of his journey. Marcus had expected the Chicago Music Academy to be a challenge, but nothing could have prepared him for the silent walls he now faced. The gleaming hallways that once felt full of promise now seemed to echo with a quiet sense of isolation. He knew he didn't quite fit in here, not yet at least. In his first weeks, Marcus found himself acutely aware of the differences between him and many of his classmates. Most came from affluent neighborhoods, their polished shoes and pristine uniforms a stark contrast to his hand-me-downs. Lunchtime conversations often revolved around vacations to Europe, private tutors, and weekend trips to the theater. Marcus, meanwhile, had spent his weekends fixing Jasmine's school projects and grocery shopping with his mom. He wasn't naive. He had always known the world could be divided by invisible lines of privilege. But feeling the weight of it daily was harder than he'd anticipated. Some students were welcoming, like his friends Liam, Sophia, and Anna, who genuinely appreciated his talent and spirit. Others, however, barely acknowledged him, or worse, whispered behind his back. He could feel their stares during class, their unspoken judgments lingering in the air like a heavy fog. One afternoon during a break, Marcus overheard a snippet of conversation in the hallway. "Did you hear he's on a scholarship?" A girl's voice drifted from around the corner. "Figures," another replied, her tone dismissive. "He probably got in just because of that program James Parker started." Marcus stopped in his tracks, his chest tightening. He clenched his fists, but forced himself to keep walking. Confronting them wouldn't change anything. He knew that. Instead, he would let his music speak for him. The pressure to prove himself became a constant companion. Every time he sat at the piano, it wasn't just about the music anymore. It was about showing that he belonged here. Every note he played, every chord progression he practiced, carried the weight of his determination. Still, the burden of perfection began to wear on him. Balancing the academy and his responsibilities at home only added to the strain. After long days of classes, he would rush back to their apartment to help Jasmine with her homework or cook dinner when Lisa worked late. He tried not to let his fatigue show, but there were nights when he fell asleep at the kitchen table, his sheet music scattered around him like fallen leaves. One particularly tough evening, Marcus returned home to find Jasmine waiting with her math book open. Her face lit up when she saw him, but his exhaustion was hard to hide. As he sat down to help her, she placed her small hand over his. "You're tired, Marcus," she said softly. "Maybe you should rest tonight." Her words, though kind, stung. Rest wasn't an option, not yet. He ruffled her hair and forced a smile. "I'll rest when your homework's done," he replied, masking the weariness in his voice. Amid the struggles, moments of doubt crept in. What if the whispers were right? What if he didn't deserve to be here? The questions lingered like a shadow, one he couldn't quite shake. But even in his lowest moments, Marcus found strength in the things that had always anchored him: his family, his faith, and his music. Mr. Albright noticed the tension in Marcus one day during a lesson. As Marcus stumbled through a particularly tricky piece, the instructor gently closed the piano lid and sat beside him. "Marcus," he began, his tone calm but firm. "You are carrying too much. I can see it in the way you play." Marcus looked away, embarrassed. I need to be good enough." "Good enough for who?" Mr. Albright pressed. "This academy isn't about competing with others. It's about finding your voice. Your music isn't for them. It's for you." Those words stuck with Marcus. That night, as he practiced alone, he let go of the need to impress. He played for himself, for Jasmine, for Lisa. The melodies came alive in a way they hadn't before, raw and authentic. Over time, Marcus began to find his footing. He stopped listening to the whispers and focused on the encouragement from those who believed in him. His friends cheered him on during class, and even Jasmine started humming along to his practice sessions at home. James Parker wasn't a man Marcus had expected to connect with. James was polished, confident, and at the peak of his career, someone who seemed to glide effortlessly through life. But as they spent more time together, Marcus realized that James's success came not from an absence of challenges, but from overcoming them with resilience and purpose. One Friday afternoon, as they sat in one of the academy's practice rooms, James leaned back in his chair and said, "Marcus, I may not know exactly what it's like to walk in your shoes, but I do know what it feels like to be underestimated." Marcus looked up from the piano keys, his curiosity piqued. "I grew up in a small town," James continued, "in a family that didn't think music was a real career. I had to fight for every opportunity, and there were plenty of people along the way who didn't take me seriously because I wasn't following the traditional path. They thought I didn't belong. But I realized something important. You can either let their opinions define you, or you can prove them wrong." James's words hit home. Marcus nodded, his fingers brushing over the keys absent-mindedly. "It's just hard sometimes," he said softly. "The looks, the whispers. It's like they're waiting for me to mess up." James straightened, his tone firm but kind. "And that's why you don't play for them, Marcus. You play for yourself. You play for the people who matter, your sister, your mom, and the part of you that knows you're meant to be here." Over the weeks, James shared more of his own experiences. He talked about moments of self-doubt, of being told no, and of learning to turn rejection into fuel. The key, he said during one session, is to focus on what you can control: your work ethic, your attitude, your music. That's where your power lies. James didn't just share advice, he helped Marcus see the bigger picture. He guided him through challenging pieces, teaching not just technique, but also how to channel his emotions into his playing. One day when Marcus struggled with a particularly expressive passage, James said, "What are you holding back? Music isn't about perfection, it's about honesty. Let them feel what you feel." At times, James challenged Marcus to confront the obstacles in his path directly. "When people see something they don't understand, they judge," James explained. "You have the chance to change their perspective, not by arguing, but by excelling. Show them why you're here." Their relationship evolved into one of mutual respect. Marcus appreciated James's ability to listen without judgment, to offer guidance without condescension. For James, mentoring Marcus wasn't just about nurturing talent, it was about helping a young musician discover his voice in a world that often tried to silence it. As their sessions continued, Marcus found himself growing, not just as a pianist, but as a person. He stood taller, spoke more confidently, and began to embrace the idea that he didn't need to blend in to belong. James's belief in him became a mirror, reflecting the potential Marcus was learning to see in himself. By the end of each lesson, Marcus left not just with new skills, but with a renewed sense of purpose. James wasn't just teaching him music, he was showing him how to navigate a world that wasn't always fair, and how to rise above it with grace and determination. The notes from the piano in the practice room resonated through the halls of the academy, a unique blend of classical precision and gospel soul that turned heads. Marcus sat at the grand piano, his hands dancing across the keys as if he had been born to play. Each chord was rich with emotion, his fingers effortlessly transitioning between the structured elegance of Beethoven and the heartfelt passion of the gospel hymns he had grown up with. It was unmistakably his style, a sound that was becoming as distinctive as his name. In just a few months, Marcus's progress was undeniable. The boy who once hesitated to play in front of others was now the subject of quiet admiration. Teachers who initially saw him just another scholarship student began to recognize his raw talent. Mr. Albright, his piano instructor, often paused during their lessons to listen, a rare smile creeping across his usually stern face. "You're creating something special, Marcus," he remarked one day. "That mix of classical and gospel, it's not just playing the piano, it's storytelling." Encouraged by these words, Marcus grew bolder in his music. He began experimenting with arrangements, adding gospel-inspired trills and flourishes to classical pieces. His playing wasn't perfect. It wasn't supposed to be. It was real, filled with the struggles and triumphs of his life, and it resonated with anyone who heard it. Beyond his music, Marcus found himself changing in other ways. He walked into the academy with more confidence, holding his head a little higher. The whispers and side glances that once made him shrink back now rolled off him. His classmates, many of whom had dismissed him initially, began to approach him, asking questions about his technique or simply offering compliments. Marcus, once shy and guarded, found his voice not just at the piano, but in conversations too. Back home, his growth didn't go unnoticed. Jasmine, always eager to share her brother's accomplishments, beamed with pride whenever she talked about him. "My brother's going to be famous," she would tell her friends, her eyes lighting up. "He's already amazing at piano, and his teachers love him." Marcus would chuckle when he overheard her, playfully ruffling her hair. "You're my biggest fan, huh?" he teased, but her unwavering belief in him meant more than he could say. The family dynamic also began to shift. Mealtime conversations often revolved around Marcus's latest achievements or Jasmine's enthusiastic recounting of how she bragged about her brother at school. Lisa, who had always been the anchor of their family, was visibly lighter. Her pride in Marcus was evident in the way she spoke about him to her colleagues at the academy's office, her smile never far from her lips. With every passing day, Marcus felt a deeper connection to his music and his future. His progress wasn't just about mastering scales or memorizing pieces. It was about finding himself, carving out his place in a world that hadn't always been welcoming. And as he played, each note carried the weight of his journey, reminding him of where he came from and pointing him toward where he was going. The grand auditorium buzzed with anticipation as parents, students, and faculty filled the rows of polished wooden seats. The Chicago Music Academy's annual recital was more than just a performance. It was a showcase of talent, a moment for students to shine. For Marcus, it was his first chance to stand in the spotlight, to share his music not just with the Academy, but with the people who mattered most. Backstage, Marcus sat at the edge of a stool, his palms slightly damp. He could hear snippets of the performances before his, a violinist's crisp notes followed by a choir's harmonies. He took a deep breath, his fingers unconsciously tracing the melody of the piece he had spent weeks perfecting. It wasn't just any piece, it was his. A composition that blended the structured beauty of classical music with the heartfelt rhythms of gospel, a sound that was uniquely Marcus. When his name was called, Marcus stood and stepped onto the stage. The spotlight warmed his skin as he adjusted the bench at the grand piano center. From the corner of his eye, he spotted his family, Lisa, Jasmine, Mr. Thomas, and James, all seated together, their faces glowing with pride. Jasmine gave him an enthusiastic wave, and Marcus couldn't help but smile. As his fingers hovered over the keys, the audience quieted, the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. But then, he remembered James's advice. Play for yourself, for the people who believe in you. With that thought, he began. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, echoing with a classical grace. But as the melody unfolded, a gospel rhythm crept in, lively, soulful, and undeniably powerful. The transition was seamless, the styles merging into something entirely new. Marcus poured his heart into every chord, every crescendo, his music speaking where words could not. By the time the final note faded, the room was silent. For a moment, Marcus held his breath, unsure of what would come next. Then the applause erupted, filling the auditorium with thunderous claps and cheers. From the stage, Marcus caught sight of Lisa dabbing at her eyes, Jasmine clapping furiously, and James giving him a proud nod. Even Mr. Thomas, always reserved, was on his feet. Marcus stood, bowing deeply. In that moment, he knew this wasn't just a performance. It was a statement. He belonged here, and his music had the power to move people. This was only the beginning. The morning after the recital, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, still basking in the glow of the night before. His fingers brushed absent-mindedly over the keys of his well-worn notebook, the same one he had used to jot down the ideas that would eventually become the piece he had performed. The memory of the audience's applause still rang in his ears, not loud or overwhelming, but warm and genuine, like an embrace. Lisa placed a plate of eggs and toast in front of him, her smile brighter than usual. "You did great last night, Marcus," she said, sitting across from him. "You made us so proud." Marcus nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Thanks, Mom," he replied. It felt good, nerve-wracking, but good. The recital had gone better than he expected. His original piece, a delicate fusion of classical and gospel influences, had drawn quiet nods from the teachers in the audience and sparked murmurs among the students. It wasn't perfect. His hands had trembled slightly at the start, and a few notes had come out softer than intended. But it was authentic. And that, Marcus realized, was what made people listen. At school the next day, a few students approached him with hesitant smiles. "That was a cool piece you played," one of them said, her voice tinged with genuine curiosity. "How'd you come up with it?" Marcus shrugged, his ears burning. "It's just stuff I grew up hearing, mixed with what I've been learning here." The compliment was small, but it felt monumental. Marcus wasn't used to being noticed, not like this. Even his teachers began to see him in a new light. During class, Mr. Albright lingered a bit longer at his piano, offering encouraging nods as Marcus worked through a piece. "You're starting to find your voice," the instructor remarked one afternoon, his tone thoughtful. "Keep leaning into it." Back at home, the success of the recital had an equally uplifting effect. Jasmine couldn't stop talking about it to her friends, proudly declaring, "My brother wrote his own song," and people clapped, like a lot. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and Marcus found himself laughing more at her antics. Lisa, too, seemed lighter, her usual tiredness replaced by a quiet pride. "You're showing people what I've always known," she said one evening as they cleaned up after dinner, "that you've got something special." The buzz from the recital extended beyond the academy. A local community center invited Marcus to perform at their upcoming talent showcase, an informal event where budding artists shared their skills. Marcus hesitated at first, unsure if he was ready for another public performance. But James encouraged him. "You've taken the first step," James said during one of their sessions. "Now keep walking. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be honest." The showcase was a smaller affair than the recital, but the atmosphere was warm and welcoming. Families gathered in folding chairs, clapping and cheering for each performer. When Marcus took the stage, he spotted his mom and Jasmine in the front row, their smiles steadying his nerves. He played the same piece, tweaking a few parts based on what he'd learned since the recital. The response was kind, a few claps, a couple of smiles, but for Marcus, it wasn't about the reaction. It was about the act of sharing his music. As the weeks went by, Marcus began to embrace these small moments of recognition. They weren't flashy or grand, but they reminded him that he was growing. His teachers continued to encourage him, his classmates began to respect him, and at home, Jasmine's unwavering support became his anchor. The successes weren't life-changing, not yet, but they were enough to fuel his belief that he was on the right path, and for now, that was more than enough. Life for the Johnsons was beginning to change, though not in ways that felt dramatic, at least not at first. Lisa's hard work as a cleaner at the academy was finally paying off. Her supervisor noticed her commitment and offered her a role managing the cleaning schedule for the entire building. The promotion meant slightly better pay and, most importantly, more predictable hours. With no need to work late nights at the restaurant, Lisa could now spend her evenings at home with Marcus and Jasmine. "It feels strange having dinner together every night," Lisa said one evening, smiling as she helped Jasmine with her homework. "But it's the kind of strange I've been hoping for." With Lisa's new role, the family decided to move closer to the academy. Their new apartment wasn't bigger or more modern, but it was just a few blocks from the school, saving Lisa a long bus ride every morning. It also gave Marcus more time for practice and less time worrying about commuting back and forth. Jasmine, thrilled about the move, loved exploring the neighborhood and discovering new playgrounds. On the first morning in their new home, Marcus sat at the small kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the window. He glanced at Lisa, who was humming softly as she prepared breakfast. "It feels different here," he said thoughtfully. "Closer, easier." Lisa nodded. "It's not much, but it's ours, and it's a step forward." Despite the changes, the family continued to keep in touch with Mr. Thomas. He often visited their new apartment, bringing small treats for Jasmine or simply staying to chat. "You've moved closer to everything that matters," he said during one visit, looking around their new place with approval. For Marcus, the move wasn't just about proximity, it was about possibility. Each small change brought them closer to a future that felt less like a struggle and more like a life filled with hope and opportunity. Together, the Johnsons embraced these changes, knowing they were building something better, one step at a time. One Friday afternoon, after their usual mentoring session, James leaned back in his chair and looked at Marcus with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice carrying the weight of an idea that had clearly been on his mind for some time. "What if we could take what you've learned here and share it with others? Kids like you, from Southside who might not have the chance otherwise." Marcus set his sheet music aside, curiosity lighting up his face. "What do you mean?" he asked. James smiled. "I want to start a weekend music program at the academy, free lessons for kids from underprivileged communities. We have the space, and I think it's time we used it for something more. You've got a story that these kids can relate to, Marcus. Who better to teach them than someone who understands what they're going through?" For a moment, Marcus was speechless. The idea of teaching music, of giving back to his community, filled him with both excitement and apprehension. "You think I can do that?" he asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I know you can," James replied firmly. "This is your chance to give others the same opportunity you've had, to show them that music isn't just for the privileged, it's for everyone." The following week, James and Marcus began working on the project. Marcus helped draft flyers and spread the word throughout Southside, visiting churches, schools, and community centers. The response was overwhelming. Parents who couldn't afford private lessons for their children eagerly signed them up, grateful for the chance to expose their kids to something new. The first Saturday of the program arrived, and Marcus felt a mix of nerves and excitement as he stepped into the academy's practice room. A dozen children, ranging in age from 6 to 13, sat in a semicircle, their eyes wide with curiosity. Some clutched instruments they'd borrowed from neighbors. Others had never touched a piano or a guitar before. "Welcome, everyone," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "I'm Marcus, and I'm here to help you discover just how amazing music can be." He started with the basics, showing the younger kids how to hold their instruments and teaching simple rhythms. For the older ones, he shared the story of how music had shaped his life, encouraging them to find their own connection to the art. As the weeks went by, Marcus grew more confident in his role as a teacher. He discovered joy in the small victories, a child mastering their first chord, another lighting up as they played a simple melody. James occasionally stopped by to observe, his pride in Marcus evident as he watched him guide the young students with patience and enthusiasm. "You've got a gift, Marcus," he said one afternoon, "not just in music, but in how you connect with these kids. You're making a real difference." The program quickly became a bright spot for the community. Parents expressed their gratitude. Children returned week after week with renewed excitement, and the academy halls echoed with laughter and music every Saturday. For Marcus, it was more than just a project. It was a way to honor where he came from and to plant seeds of hope for the future. In those moments, as he watched his students play their first songs or laugh at their mistakes, Marcus felt something he hadn't expected: fulfillment. He wasn't just sharing music, he was sharing possibility, proving that even in the hardest of circumstances, creativity and joy could thrive. 3 years had passed, and the grand auditorium of the Chicago Music Academy was alive with anticipation. Every seat was filled, and the air buzzed with excitement as families, students, and community members gathered for a special charity concert organized by none other than Marcus Johnson. It was a milestone event, marking how far he had come and how much he had given back. The evening's highlight was an extraordinary collaboration, the Southside Church Choir, where Marcus had first fallen in love with music, performing alongside the Academy's orchestra. The stage was a vibrant blend of gospel and classical influences, a mirror of Marcus's own musical journey. As the lights dimmed and the first notes rang out, the audience was captivated. The rich, soulful voices of the choir harmonized effortlessly with the precision of the orchestra, creating a performance that was both powerful and moving. Marcus, standing off stage, watched with pride as the vision he had worked so hard to bring to life unfolded before him. This wasn't just a concert, it was a celebration of community, resilience, and the transformative power of music. When the final chord echoed through the hall, the audience erupted into applause, their cheers reverberating long after the last note had faded. Marcus took the stage thanking the performers, his mentors, and everyone who had supported the event. "Tonight we've shown what happens when people come together for something greater than themselves," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. The concert raised significant funds for a scholarship program aimed at providing music education to underprivileged children. As the evening came to a close, James Parker took the stage, beaming with pride. "Thanks to your generosity," he announced, "we're expanding our scholarship program to reach even more students in need. This is just the beginning." For Marcus, the night was more than just a success. It was a moment of reflection. He had gone from a young boy with a dream to a mentor, a leader, and a beacon of hope for others. As he stepped off stage, he was greeted by children from his weekend music program, their eyes shining with admiration. "Someday," one of them said, clutching a flyer from the concert, "I want to be just like you." Marcus smiled, kneeling to their level. "You can be," he replied. "You can be even better." That night, as the auditorium emptied and the lights dimmed, Marcus knew this was only the beginning of a much larger journey, for himself, for his students, and for the community that had shaped him.